Today is a special day in our country where we pause to honor and appreciate the women in our lives, the mothers, grandmothers, and even the spiritual mothers, those whose faith has shaped us in countless ways. It's quite appropriate to remember the influence and teachings these women have had on our lives, especially as we've been talking about having a transformative faith. Many of us who are here today are here because the quiet, steady, prayerful faith of our mothers and grandmothers and other women in our lives. Their faith left an imprint on our lives. So as we continue our study this morning, I would encourage the moms and the grandmas and other women in our lives to continue to be that example of the transformative faith that we as followers of Jesus have been called to have. No matter, though, who we are or from where we come, here is the heart of the matter, I believe. Faith is not just something we believe. Faith is something that changes who we become. Over the past couple of weeks, we have been exploring what it means to have a transformative faith, a faith that goes beyond belief and actually reshapes our lives. In week one, we talked about how faith changes the way we respond to the world. It's easy to claim to have belief in God, but our faith shows up in how we treat others and how we handle frustration and conflict and pain. We looked at how our reactions reveal the presence of Christ within us or the absence of transformation. Last week, we focused on how faith gives us a new purpose, how we're not just here to sit in pews every Sunday and attend services, that God created each of us with unique gifts and a calling to serve Him. We learned that the church is not an event to attend. No, it is rather a mission to live. Well, this morning, too often people believe in God, but they never let that belief transform them. The Bible makes clear faith is not about agreeing just with new ideas. It's about becoming someone new. So as we begin this morning, faith, we see, begins with seeking God, not just knowing about Him. Way back in 1859, on June the 30th, a crowd of about 25,000 people gathered to see something that no one had ever done before, to witness Charles Blondin walk a tightrope stretched 1,100 feet across the Niagara Falls with no safety net below him. And you know what? He did it. And the crowd erupted in roars and cheers and amazement at the feat that this man had just accomplished. You know what? He wasn't done yet. He had something else in mind. On a later attempt, he upped the stakes. He decided this time he was going to push a wheelbarrow across the road. The crowd watched in breathless anticipation. Before he began, though, he turned and he asked the crowd, "Do you believe I can do this?" And the crowd cheered, "Yes!" And he turned to a nearby reporter who was covering the event and he said, "Do you believe I can cross this rope with the wheelbarrow?" And the reporter said, "Absolutely, I believe." And so Blondin looked at him square in the eyes and he said, "Then get in the wheelbarrow." Belief became a little harder at that moment, didn't it? That's the difference between believing something and having faith in someone and trusting them. It is the difference between saying we believe in God and actively pursuing a relationship with Him that transforms our lives. The Hebrew writer says this in Hebrews 11, verse 6. It is impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to Him must believe that God exists and that He rewards those who sincerely seek Him. You see, it's not just enough to believe. There are two parts to faith that pleases God. It is first believing that He exists. That's a very important part of faith. That's the easiest part of it, if you will. Many people believe in a higher power these days in the world around us. Some even believe that it's the God of Scripture and that He is real, but that's not enough. There has to be the second part of faith, which is sincerely seeking Him. You see, that's not so easy, is it? But when we earnestly, sincerely, and humbly seek God, that is where transformation will begin in our lives. It's not enough to simply say we believe. Real faith requires us to climb into the wheelbarrow. Real faith says, I trust you, God, with everything. Think about a little child. They don't just know that their parents exist. What do? They run to them. They cling to them. They cry out for them when they're scared or hurt or tired. And in that seeking, what happens? A relationship is formed. Trust is built. Dependency is learned. It's not the knowledge that changes the child's life. No, it is the pursuit of the parent. And that is what is important today for us in our relationship with God. This morning, how many of us are standing on the banks cheering for Jesus, but we're not willing to get into the wheelbarrow of life? Are we simply aware of God? Do we believe He's real but keep Him at arm's length, or do we sincerely and urgently seek Him every day in our lives? Faith, friends, is not passive belief. It is an active pursuit of a relationship with God. It's only when we start truly seeking God that transformation begins to take root in our hearts. And it's not in just what we think, but it's in who we are. This morning, are we standing on the edge, applauding God's power, or are we stepping into faith and letting Him carry us along each day, ultimately to the other side? Second, this morning, I think that faith is the catalyst for real change. Faith is not just about believing differently. It's about becoming someone new. And let's be clear here, true transformation is not a microwave moment. It's not instantaneous. It is not convenient, and it is not surface level. Transformation is slow, deep, spiritual work that God does in us when we surrender our old selves to Him and let Him create something brand new in us. You remember the Russian comedian Yakov Smirnoff? I love him. He's absolutely hilarious. I love him. He made he was on TV back in the 80s a lot, different TV shows. He tells the story that when he first immigrated to the United States from the Ukraine, he said one of the things that amazed him the most was American grocery stores. And so one day he was walking down an aisle and he saw powdered milk, and he thought, just add water, you get milk. Pretty cool. And then he saw powdered orange juice, and he said, just add water, instant orange juice. That's pretty cool. And then he saw baby powder. And he thought to himself, what a country. How he would always say that. We laugh because the logic is absurd, but many approach faith just like that, don't we? Just read one Bible verse and expect peace in your life. Just attend church one morning and sit in the pew and expect instant joy and changes in our lives. Just pray once and expect everything to change overnight. A faith in Jesus, folks, though, is not about a quick fix. It's not just stir in a little Jesus. Not add a little Jesus and stir. It doesn't work that way. In 2 Corinthians 5, Paul talks about the significance of truly knowing Jesus, not just believing, but being fully confident in the promises of God. And in verse 17, he writes this. He says, anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone. A new life has begun. Notice what Paul is saying here. He says, we have become a new person. New. A new life has begun. Not just a new behavior, not just a self-improvement project to fix up what is wrong. No, he says it's a new creation that is being completely transformed from the inside out. And Paul echoes this very same thought in Galatians chapter 2 that we have read in the last couple of weeks. He says, my old self has been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. So I live in this earthly body, not by just believing in God, but by completely trusting in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Folks, that's not just add some Jesus to your old life. It's not just believe and all is well. No, it's not. That's a lay your life down and let Christ raise you up completely new, completely different, completely changed, completely transformed. But are we just trying to sprinkle a little Jesus into our routines today? Or are we ready to truly let him transform us? Real change takes time. Real transformation comes from seeking and pursuing God, by surrendering ourselves to him. Real faith lets go of the old life and steps fully into a new one. Real faith is not about behavior modification. Real faith is about spiritual transformation. So friends, I encourage you to not settle for powdered faith. Let God do the full work of renewing our hearts and our minds and transforming us by letting Christ live within us each and every day. Third, this morning, I think faith shapes our story, one obedient step at a time. That one summer, 4-year-old Dylan Stitch was afraid to dive off from the diving board in the family swimming pool. His mom, Marla, said he just had no interest in it ever. Wasn't for him. Right? Everybody was just telling him, well, why don't you give it a shot? You'll love it if you try it. Why don't you just try? Wasn't going to happen. Enter into the story 95-year-old Daniel Biss. He was in the Air Force during World War II and the Korean War. He knew a thing or two about fear and bravery. And so when he saw the neighborhood this kid at a family pool party and heard everyone trying to coax him off the board, he knew exactly what Dylan needed. And so Daniel said, you know what? He just needed some convincing, I guess. You know what? I was going to try. So Daniel Bitts, 95 years old, borrowed a swimsuit and with his cane in hand stepped up onto the diving board to set an example. This great-grandfather hadn't been on a diving board in 50 years. But he stood up and he got on there ready to teach a lesson in courage, which everyone kind of feared might turn into a lesson in first aid, but that's another story for another day. Dylan's mom, Marla, said everyone kind of held their breath, got real nervous, like, oh, is this going to be a bad idea? But Daniel said, I had gotten up that far, and I figured I might as well go through with it. So at the age of 95, he dove into the pool for Dylan. Wasn't the prettiest of dives, we're told. But he couldn't have done any better because shortly afterwards, Daniel climbed up on the diving board and jumped off. Took his first dive. His mom said it was really neat that inspired him to do it. It was a really neat moment for our family. Dylan jumped in, has had no problem since. You know, sometimes we need the example of others to inspire us, don't we? To inspire us to have courage, to step out and to help us in our walk of faith. That's exactly what the Hebrew writer gives us in Hebrews chapter 11. Real examples of real people who responded with faith. Picking up in Hebrews 11, verse 7, it says, "It was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about things that had never happened before. By his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world, and he received the righteousness that comes by faith. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going, and even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, where he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God." Skipping down to verse 24, it was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He kept right on going because he kept his eye on the one who is invisible. Skipping down to verse 31, it was by faith that Rahab, the prostitute, was not destroyed with her people in her city, who refused to obey God, for she had given friendly welcome to the spies. And then in Hebrews 12:1, the author brings it all home, wraps it all up, and he says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily ties us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us." Folks, Noah built. Abraham obeyed. Moses walked away from privilege. Rahab risked everything. Folks, these were not perfect people. Noah did most things right until the flood was over, and then he got drunk, passed out in his tent, and was naked in there and caused shame to his own family. Abraham, well, he was a big liar. He lied twice about his relationship with Sarah to protect himself. And then later, he took matters into his own hands, and instead of trusting God to give him a son, he went and did his own thing. Moses, well, he killed an Egyptian, and then he ran for his life. Rahab, well, most of us, she had a past that most of us won't really want to talk about. Her profession was far from godly, and yet God used these folks. These folks were faithful to God, and these are the people that God calls out through the Hebrew writer to show us and to highlight as examples of faith to us. God, you see, is not looking for perfection. He's looking for trust. Do we trust him? Do we live each day trusting him? You see, transformation doesn't just happen in a flash. It happens over time through many small faithful steps. You know, it happened when Noah picked up that first board and said, "I'm going to build a boat." It happened when Abraham took that first step out of the city of Ur. When Moses turned his back on privilege. When Rahab heard the knock at her door and opened her door to the spies. These folks are not acts of perfection. They were acts of trust. And God honored that. And God has honored them as examples for us today. On this Mother's Day, we see that faith is rarely built in one grand act. Most of the time, it is shaped by quiet, steady faithfulness. Think about the women of faith who has shaped your life. Chances are they were not superheroes. They probably didn't perform any miracles, not that we would consider miracles. They didn't lead revivals. But as the song said that Roger sang, they prayed. They showed up. They loved you even when you didn't deserve to be loved. And folks, let's just be honest, there were some of those times in our lives growing up. They kept the faith through hardship, disappointment, through the ordinary days. Their steady walk with Jesus left footprints for us to follow today. So this morning, consider this. Our life of faith very well may be the foundation upon which someone else is building today. How is our faith in God shaping our lives today? What faithful steps do we need to take? Maybe it's time to stop chasing perfection and to start walking in obedience. Maybe it's time to believe that our past does not disqualify us from being used by God. Maybe it's time to be reminded that we don't need to leap into greatness. We just need to take one step forward in faith. Maybe we run the race today. Not flawlessly, but faithfully. That's the kind of faith that will not only transform our lives, but it'll transform the lives of those who are watching us and looking up to us and seeing what kind of people we are. This morning we're not called to admire Jesus. We're called to be changed by him. Faith is not something we simply believe. It is something that shapes who we are and who we become. It's not about having all the answers. It's not about being perfect. It's about trusting God enough to take the next step. Faith seeks God with urgency, not just casually acknowledging him. Faith changes us, when we step from it. Let me try that again. Faith changes us from the inside out, forming a new creation in Christ. Faith walks one obedient step at a time, even when the path is unclear. And like the great cloud of witnesses we read about in Hebrews 11, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Rahab, and the many others that the Hebrew writer cites, we are invited to keep running our own race, not perfectly, but faithfully. Those folks are not remembered because they had a spotless past. They are remembered because they trusted and obeyed. Maybe this morning you're here because someone else had that kind of steady faith in your life. A mother, a grandmother, a teacher, a mentor. She didn't try to be impressive. She was simply faithful. And her faith shaped your life. The question now is, whose faith will your life shape next? The Hebrew writer encourages us at the beginning of chapter 12 by saying this: let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. What is your next step in the race today? Is it to believe? Really, truly believe and begin to pursue God? Or is it to surrender? To stop trying to manage your own transformation and finally let Christ live in you completely? Or maybe it's to obey today, to step out, serve, to lead, to love someone with the gifts God has given you. You don't have to take a leap into greatness. You just have to trust God enough to take the next. So today, don't just sit in that pew and believe. Walk in faith. Let the transformation begin in your life today.